views expressed on the Vecinos podcast by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent, and does not represent the opinions of any entity or the opinions of any of PepsiCo, the companies affiliated, or within the Vecinos Collective. Vecinos brings together a vibrant and diverse community of Latinx employee resource groups committed to fostering an environment of inclusion, visibility, and professional development through collaboration, networking, and mentoring its members and the Latinx community at large. Today's discussion is about the impact of COVID-19 on the Latinx community. We have an amazing group of panelists with us today, so let's get into it.
Hi everyone, bienvenidos to our Vecinos podcast, where we'll be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the Latinx community. My name is Esperanza Teasdale, and I'm the VP-GM of the Hispanic Business Unit for PepsiCo Beverages, North America. I lead a multidisciplinary team that's focused on building relevance with Hispanic consumers, as well as accelerating growth faster than the general market. I've been at PepsiCo for 17 years. Before that, I worked at Unilever in manufacturing and sales, and I am the proud daughter of two immigrants, Pablo y Esperanza, who are from Ecuador and Colombia. And so I'm excited for this conversation, so I'll introduce other guest panelists. I'll start off with Stacy de Armas. She is the SVP of Diverse Consumer Insights and Initiatives and the D&E practice at Nielsen. Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Esperanza. Thanks for having me today.
You'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am Stacy de Armas, and I've been with Nielsen for quite a long time, about a little more than 2 decades. But during that time, I've had a lot of different experiences and opportunities at Nielsen. Primarily now I'm responsible for diverse innovation at Nielsen. I like to think of it like that. So that means that I'm responsible for the initiatives that we take for product, taking a look at the products that we put forward, whether or not we're properly representing diverse audiences or how we can improve on that representation, and innovation, how we can better represent things we haven't done before. So that's my area of responsibility at Nielsen. I work across all of our verticals, but primarily within media. My history has always been on the media and the advertising side of the business. I started very early on at an ad agency in Los Angeles, and I've had the opportunity to focus pretty quickly on the U.S. Hispanic market. So it's been the bulk of my career, my personal and professional passion. I am the daughter also of an immigrant. I have had the privilege of growing up in Los Angeles. I have 2 children, and I am Cubana.
Awesome. Good to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Next, I would like to introduce Annette Perfetti, Associate Strategy Director at Ogilvy. Hi, Annette.
Hi, Esperanza. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Annette Perfetti, Annette Marroquin Perfetti. I'm Mexican, and I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas. Shortly after graduating, I started working for a small multicultural agency in Dallas, Texas. From there, I was recruited to Chicago, which is where I'm currently residing, and have essentially just been in advertising for about 8 years now, kind of going back and forth from the Hispanic market and general market roles. But currently, I am at Ogilvy. And as you mentioned, I'm the Associate Strategy Director, but focusing specifically on consumer engagement. So I lead that practice there in the Chicago office, and we're focused on just growth and innovation and just making sure that we're providing excellent consumer experiences across every touch point for all of our brands. And likewise, I am also the proud daughter of 2 immigrants, Ramiro y Anita. Hi, Mami Papi. And I'm very excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Great to meet you, Annette. And next, I'll introduce Alexis Mena, who is the Creative Director and co-founder of University. Hi, Alexis. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexis Mena. I am, my pronouns are they and them. I'm the co-founder and lead farmer at University, which is a new project we started in 2019. We're building an aquaponic farm and food hub to build food sovereignty in the community I'm from, East New York. I am identified as Afro-Taino. I'm the descendant of Haitian and Dominican folk, specifically from San Francisco de Macorís. And my background is in real estate, finance, and I'm a muralist. So I primarily been doing public art for the most of my life, and worked most recently as a public art manager at a nonprofit for a few years called Artist New York. And I'm an organizer, so I organize full time in my community around food sovereignty, anti-gentrification efforts, and the well-being of people overall. Thank you for having me today.
Awesome. Great to meet you. Well, so this conversation is important because I think we know that, COVID-19 has impacted our communities, more disproportionately than the general population. Our community tends to be many frontline workers. They're at more risk than others. We're seeing more unemployment, which means dual impact to our community here in the US and in their own countries. Yet Latinos are very resilient and optimistic, and they lean into family and music and digital and other ways to just stay connected and to really overcome the challenges they're happening today. So so to get started in this conversation, just kind of had some questions that wanted to ask to get your perspectives. So I'm going to start off with Annette. Annette, can you give a little bit of background into why there's such a negative health impact on Latinos during the pandemic?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, the Latino community has been disproportionately affected during COVID-19. Right now, Latinos make up the highest number of COVID-19 cases. So we essentially represent 27% of COVID deaths, although we account for 18% of the population, which is absurd and extremely high. So why? I think you mentioned a few factors, but I have a few additional to add. So a lot of the time, as you mentioned, we don't have the luxury of working from home. So what we've seen is that 84% of the Latino population are currently deemed as essential workers. So they are putting themselves on the front lines, working within like the food service industry or meat packing plants, which are right now hotspots and places of employment. So they're exposed to the disease more so than other populations. A large number of Latinos don't have access to healthcare still, because they work at companies that don't offer that, or some of them are self-employed and don't have the luxury of having, like, it's more expensive if you're self-employed, and a lot of them are undocumented. So those are benefits that healthcare specifically are benefits that undocumented folks don't have. In general, just Latinos don't predominantly have access to healthcare like other people do. So it's disproportionately affecting them. We also have a higher rate of diabetes than any other ethnic group in the US, so 16% specifically, which is a huge problem and puts our community more so at risk. Additionally, I mean, I can go on and on. There's so many factors, but just to hit on two other points, there a lot of the times our people live in multi-generational households, so isolating is essentially made impossible. So again, like the list goes on and on, but those are some of the more predominant things that come to mind from a healthcare perspective.
And Annette, this is Stacey. You're absolutely right. You've nailed it. What I wanted to add is, what's interesting is when you look at all of these issues, these challenges that the community has, but you take, several steps back, you zoom out, it really has to do with just overall our community having this really significant sort of gap in access to all kinds of things, whether it's financial education or educational attainment. What COVID has done is really shine a light on all of these inequities that have really always been there, right? And as a result of all these inequities, whether they're in health, they're in educational attainment, they're in access to financial education, whatever they are, it's shined this light where all of these things have now bubbled up for us, for the African American community, for other POC communities. It really is, we look at it and we think, well, this is as a result of COVID, but it's not really as a result of COVID. COVID has just allowed us to see more clearly the inequities that we all knew already existed. And I suppose the bright side of that is, if there is any, right, is that now we can really clearly see where we need to have more concerted effort and action, right? And Alexi, I think about the work that you do with the community, and when you introduced yourself and you talked a bit of, about being an organizer, I'm sure your perspective on the ground is, perhaps, I'm sure it's quite different than the business perspective from which I see it.
I love that. Thank you for adding that, Bill.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that ultimately there are systematic failures in this situation, and there also are local failures. Local leadership are showing up for people during this time as well. And I think that, like, of course, the world has never faced anything like this before. However, systems of mutual aid are something that's fundamental in Latinx communities. I think that, like, that term mutual aid has been thrown around a lot now because of COVID and emergency response. But from the communities I grew up in, mutual aid was a staple in how we function. And I think that that's one of the reasons why Latinx communities are so resilient today. However, when we lack access to the resources, both on a systematic level and on a local level, what hope do we really have? Because if I'm struggling and my neighbor's struggling, then how much can we really help each other? I feel like we're at a place today where people are so stretched thin that they don't know where to turn, and they feel guilty turning to someone who, in the past, they felt no problem turning to. Just
yeah, I want to, if it's okay, SB, I just want to segue on that a little bit. When you talk about systems of mutual aid, this is what Nielsen, we just did this piece of research and released it on COVID impacts on the Latino community. And there are a lot of different impacts, right? Certainly we consumed media differently, we bought products differently, we were affected differently from an economic standpoint. But the one thing that we saw in all these areas was that our communities really rely on our social networks. And when I say that, I'm talking about the in-person networks, right? So as COVID began to put pressure on our communities, and Alexi, this is just exactly, I feel like you put it into such good words when you said mutual aid. Our community began to suffer under the stress of COVID. And when I say that, I mean our community bonds, right? Are the social networks that we've built and relied upon, and really as a construct of the way things came about in America. I think of my dad and his experience of coming here, and really my Cuban family having to build their own networks, rely upon one another, build, depend on, educate, inform, all together in these smaller networks, and then being able to use those networks to advance, right? That's how our community has grown and advanced in America. And a lot of that took place in, these networks, but it took place in person. These were in-person dialogues. They were, and I don't just mean face-to-face, I mean personal networks. And as COVID rained down, it really put pressure on those personal or those physical networks that Latinos have come to rely upon in order to advance. And that's not to say we didn't use social networks or social media. Of course we did, everyone does. It's to say that there was a different value placed on these physical networks. And as those began to, really sort of experience the pressure of us having social distancing, quarantining, staying at home, and not being able to lay into those or lean into those physical networks, our community began to suffer doubly, because it is those networks through which we learn, inform, engage, and help one another. So when you said mutual aid, I just right away, I'm like, oh, this is exactly the way that I want to present this concept of the importance of our physical networks and how they were at risk of being, sort of broken down. But I will tell you, as you said, resilience, the community immediately bridged those gaps in ways that, from a data perspective, I've never seen. We took a look at just some applications and tools, Alexi, and Annette, that people use to communicate with one another. We all use, right? Zoom and Kik and WhatsApp, and the usage by the Latino community was remarkable. So everybody used those things more. Everybody used apps and connection tools more during COVID, but the Latino community far more than you would expect. And this is a result of not allowing those networks that were so important to us to break down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know I've seen a lot of things on social media where you'll have like a grandson that's kind of making fun of, but also like, oh my gosh, like I can't hug my abuelita. And just that physical nature of how Latinos in general are very emotive, they're very physical, like, you know, the caring comes through in so many ways, and all of that emotive you know, is kind of pressure tested now because of distance. But no, that's a great point. And I think, you know, it really leads into some of the other questions that we had here, you know, was just like in general, the impact of consumers throughout the pandemic. And you talked, Stacey, about that component. But Annette, was there anything that you felt you wanted to add to that too?
I mean, I think Stacy hit it right on the head. She's a Nielsen expert. She's
That's
got,
true.
yeah.
Oh, all that data gets in the way of being fun. I'm sorry.
No, no,
I love
no,
it.
it's so important. And just to build on that, and I'd love to get a copy of that research you did, by the way, if it's
Of course.
available.
It is. It's free. We should, you know, when just for the
Yeah,
people that are
socialize it.
listening, Nielsen.com/Latinos. It's free. Please download it, learn. And we really go pretty specific, not only into apps, but we talk about podcasts. You'll be happy to know Latinos almost 20% more time listening to podcasts. So I'm sure this will fall right in line. And all sorts of other media consumption insights. I mean, as we have time through this dialogue, if it makes sense, I'll share some more of the insights. But you know, our community really, as Alexis said too, just really resilient and using every tool that we can. And it's not to say not significantly impacted, because we are, but also not really willing to be you know, to let this break down our networks, our community, and our advancement.
Yeah, and a lot of that goes to like just the general resilience, perseverance, and sacrifice that this community has inherently in its DNA to just really persevere no matter what happens. And I do think too, like information that we're hearing here from all of you coming from different angles is important for myself in a company like I'm in, because then it's on me to take that and to socialize that and share that back with my organization so that we're more educated and we realize like how we can also learn and then influence on what we do to affect the community in a positive way. So I really appreciate that work you do. Annette, I'm gonna flip it back to you for a minute here. You know, we've seen a lot of conversation around Black Lives Matter, and you know, so the question is, you know, how do we better elevate the voice of the Hispanics in a similar way and highlight the solidarity with Black Lives Matter? You know, similar experiences I think that have occurred. But what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think as Latinos, we definitely understand the racial injustice, over policing, systemic racism, and the overall oppression of the people of color throughout the history of this country. So I think that we can definitely relate to the struggles of the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black community as a collective. And I think together we probably feel like enough is enough. So I was actually at a rally in Chicago a few weeks ago, and what I loved about it was organized by the Black Lives Matter movement, but it was a Black Lives Matter / Indigenous People rally, because again, like the same things that are affecting the Black community are affecting the Latinx community. And I, in no way, shape, or form, want to undermine what's going on in the Black community. I think that their struggles are a lot. I mean, they have greater struggles, especially in this moment of time. However, I really liked that we came together during that rally, because it first off, it brought us together as one. It showed the community that we are people of color, and we are one people, and we support each other, and we should be there for each other. And I liked this like term of "tu lucha es mi lucha," and I heard it a lot during that rally, and it just really spoke to me. And I think to the people that were there in attendance and everybody that saw that whatever content came out of that on social media. But essentially, I guess just getting back to the root of your question, it's really, I think the simplest answer I have for this, like elevating the Hispanic voice, is first and foremost, we need to stand with the Black community because they are the ones that are most affected by racial injustice. And once we unify our voices, I think it's naturally going to elevate the oppressions that we both face. So it's just going to be like a natural, I guess, like a natural event that happens once we just become one and are unified together. So I think like the key takeaway here for me, at least, is show up, right? Just like show up in the community, use your voice, act as one, be a unit, join the fight together. Because I think collectively we're stronger as a group, and the voices of Hispanic people will be elevated through the voices of the Black community and vice versa. But we just have to show up together as one because for the most part, we are going through the same racial injustices and oppressions and difficulties. And I think we just need to unify and, again, just come together.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think from that perspective, then, Alexei, how do you think, or what tools or resources do you feel are out there that, you know, corporations or individuals can kind of lean into to try to lean in and be more helpful and show up to really help support the community?
Yeah, in my opinion, it really depends. You know, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, there are corporations are seen as people in the society we're in, right? So it really depends on whether you are a business owner or whether you are an employee and which resources are available to you. But I think that you should always start first on a local level as to where you can tap into, and some of the community aid networks that I was mutual aid networks that I was referring to earlier. There have been a lot of people who banded together to create to pool their resources and be able to show up for other people. And depending on where you're at, I think that there's also a lot of nonprofits and emergency response groups that have been showing up in communities like World Central Kitchen. Here in Brooklyn, there's been a lot of people who've stepped up from City Harvest and Rethink. My own organization has put together a food distribution network that includes toiletries. So I feel like there's a lot of things that you can try to get that may not be available to you through government resources because of maybe your mixed status, or you don't want to be outed at this time. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are scared about, right? They're going through COVID at the same time that we're that as a mixed status person, by coming out and looking for resources, that they're going to be outed and ICE might be knocking at the door. So I think it's really important that we look internally to other people in our communities for support first, and then rely on government second, because right now they're not showing up for us. But I think that both are important. Both are equally important, and being able to lean upon the, like I said, the nonprofits and the other organizations, community-based organizations that have been showing up for these communities for a long time. Those are the ones that are really trying to continue to build resiliency in these communities by setting up systems of longevity. And I feel like that's what we need to invest in right now.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about brands and corporations. We know it. We all know, right? Certainly, it's been quite some time, but most recently, it's really clear that brand conduct equals brand affinity, right? And I think as people of color and Latinos, as we exercise our buying power, I know the data shows us that we're increasingly deciding to spend our dollars with brands that understand our journey, that understand the struggle, and that have been alongside us, right? Through COVID, before, through ICE raids, through just all of the things that have been occurring. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a brand needs to stand up and take a firm stance on something, politically polarizing. It means that brands need to understand our journey, align, and support. And it's different, right? I mean, they really are different. And you mentioned a few examples, Alexi, when being part of the community and providing resources that the community needs, whether they're educational, whether it's food or other tangible things. But that really, for me, when if I want to sum it up into just 4 words, it's brand conduct equals brand affinity. And while I struggle because I don't want to boil it down to a branding message, right? This is much more than that. But what I want brands to understand is, doing the right thing for the right reason and walking alongside communities is going to be better for their brand and I'm not talking again about just brand awareness and generating revenue. It's the right thing to do, and that by doing that, people will want to align themselves with your brand, because as you said, Alexi, a brand is like an individual. It's so much more than just a thing. And listen, there has never been, we have several examples, which I'm sure we won't go into exactly on this call, but that we can think of, where we had questions about brands that, that were perhaps very close to us, right? Or close to our community. And it made things that occurred with it, for these brands or stances they took, made us think, what's happening here, from the sports world all the way into every other, CPG and entertainment category. An example I think of too is like the NFL, and sort of the massive pivot that they took in light of the social justice calls to action. And it really makes you think about how you align yourselves and your dollars and what's important to you with brands. And I think moving forward, brand behavior is incredibly important. And we're a very powerful community. I mean, we, $1.9 trillion coming up in 2024 of buying power. I can't imagine anyone would very easily, disregard the importance and the power of our community.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it kind of leads then to, how then the media, portrays things, and how can it create more empathy for the issues and the real needs that we have, given that some of the tonality becomes very divisive. But, what points of view do you guys have on that? Annette, do you want to address?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's difficult to get into, right? Because it just depends on what I don't know, like media outlets you're tuned into, and who your social following is, who you follow on social, who you surround yourself with. So I think it's just it depends. And also, as like Latinos living in the US, there's we are I mean, there's a lot of us, and we're very different. So I think there's just a lot that goes into that question. But I think in regards to, I don't know, just like leaning into media and how it's addressing everything, I think it's actually a tricky one. You know what? I think I just saw raise her hand, so I'm gonna pass it over.
I'm trying to so you said earlier, I think we all said, we are Latino. I love to talk, and through this whole podcast, I'm waving my arms through the air for people that are listening. This is just how I talk. I have one small addition here, but I really want to hear from Annette and Alexi in particular about, the community's response and view of this. But I will say one of the most important things that, media can do right now to create more empathy is better storytelling, right? More authentic storytelling. And the opportunity we have here is I'm not just talking about scripted content, I'm talking about news, right? And the benefit is we have so many activists out there that are developing their own content, that are, recording content, that are sharing their stories with us. And we have never had better access to this content than we do now. All of us right now on this podcast can, click on something, either we can look at an Instagram story or something from YouTube or a media, something that perhaps is on owned media from a website. And we can learn about a story. And it is through that storytelling now that media can help create more empathy to the issues. I mean, that's really, thank goodness for, the single best thing that has happened for racial and social justice is the people recording things on their phone, because now we see more, we can validate these stories, and it gives us a chance to share in our pain, right? And actively come together and do something. And that's not to say we should be, sharing and consuming all of this content, because it's also not necessarily perhaps the right thing to do, is just to continually watch people being, just killed and things online. But it's to say that it does allow us to learn and share stories in different ways. So, media creators, content developers, their charge is to tell real stories and ensure that the communities learn through these stories. They're not shock value stories, but that we learn what we're doing wrong, what we need to do better, where the gaps are. I will say, we all know news is a tough spot. I'll give you a quick piece of data that Latinos told us when we did our most recent piece of research, just how much they felt disconnected to cable news. And so the statistic is 20% of Hispanics, only 20% said that cable news is trustworthy, and less than that said it was accurate, just 18%. So think about English language cable news, right? It is very clearly like two views. And Alexi, I see you, shaking your head, so I'm going to stop and I'd love to hear your response. But it's really two views. It's like polarizing, one or the other. Whereas if you think about Spanish language news and local news, it's more about helping the community bridge the gap. What do you need to know? How can I help you get there? Who are the resources, right? And so there are networks, endemic networks, that are doing a great job. We see the same thing, for Black networks. But when it comes to cable news, and English language news, there's just really these two views, and our community isn't responding to that. So what can media do to create more empathy? Tell stories that matter and ground them in truth. And Alexia, I saw you shaking your head. I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
No, yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that it's really important that we are in control of that narrative, right? So it's really important that as people are sharing their stories, that they feel like they can have control of that. Because I feel like right now there's a lot of misrepresentation, and people might be getting some local attention, maybe some national attention on projects that they may be working on, or things that are happening in the community. But often enough, people don't feel like they can actually have an influence on how that story is portrayed. And I think right now more than ever, it's really important that we do that, that we lean in and assert ourselves, and making sure that what you were meant to be quoted is quoted the way you wanted it heard. And I feel like often enough you see a lot of people get the story's not straight, and when that happens, this misrepresentation allows people to take and twist what it is that you're actually the original intentions of the effort. And I think like that's something that people need to be very open to and wary of, to make sure that they can control how they're portrayed.
Annette, did you want to add something to that too?
Yeah, I think everything that Stacy and Alexi said was spot on, and it actually sparked a few thoughts. I really I love leaning into the fact that like we are creating our own narrative, especially like with social media. Everybody does have a voice now, and our communities are amplifying our voices, so that's fantastic. Like the regular Joes get to trend on social, and that's how the stories get shared. So it's fantastic, and I think we, as a community, need to continue to amplify those stories that we want out there, and that type of like content that we want others to see. But additionally, I think in addition to looking at it from like a media perspective, I think I just want to like hammer home on that last point that I made. I think it's like easy. We had a conversation at work the other day in regards to like allyship, but we kind of turned it into like accompliceship. So really leaning into not only being an ally, maybe at a distance, or just like from a thought perspective, but really leaning into like amplifying the voices and the stories and everything that matters of our community through social, because it's the easiest way to do so.
Annette, that is so powerful. I love it. So it's almost to say, allyship is important, but I don't need an ally. I need an accomplice.
Yeah.
Right? I need somebody that's going to walk this with me, have my back, and advocate for me, not just silently support my cause. Like, that's great, but I need an accomplice. Boy, that is powerful, and that is really, really powerful. I hope you don't mind if I use it. I will definitely credit you with it. It's so good because it really it's elevating that, it's raising it up a notch, and I just love it. Well said.
Thank you.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think for our company too, that idea also is related to having a seat at the table. So in our corporation, as more and more, people of color become in leadership roles and elevate that need of having allies, accomplices, and really changing the game on how we think about things, and then how we action out areas like diversity and engagement, not just within our own associate base, but with the business. Um, it puts responsibility on anyone in a leadership role to take that charge, to lean in and to say, I'm going to do that. And that's also inherent in the Latino community too, of, the mutual action you were mentioning before. Is I then think about, how do I apply that internally, so then it's also the helping unlock that change of thought within an organization that can then hopefully do that as well with the community. So I really like that as well. Well, I think we're close to time here, so I kind of just wanted to maybe go round robin, and if anyone has any closing thoughts that you want to share, feel free.
Well, I see everyone smiling because you guys know I have closing thoughts. I'm sorry. I just love this. I love the opportunity to respond to these questions, for us to share, all of our knowledge and experience. And I love that, there will be an audience that will listen to this and hopefully help, empower them and shape their thoughts. The one thing I wanted to add earlier, we were talking about social justice and the Latino community really aligning and wrapping our arms around the Black Lives Matter, movement. I wanted to share that, I think for our community too, there's a lot of familiarity, right, with this charge for equality. So, right, we all know in Latin America, certainly this year and last year, there have been just, people pouring into the streets for equality, all across Latin America. And so, these are families and communities of ours here in the United States. And not to mention the similarities, of course, of all the civil rights movements of the 60s from our Black brothers and sisters, and those, Cesar Chavez and farm workers. It's like there were just so many things that were familiar and that we knew as a community we needed to align with this cause, and we did. And I'm proud that our community wrapped our arms around, our Black brothers and sisters for this, and we continue to. And as you mentioned, Annette, I fully expect that. Listen, when the decision was coming down on DACA, I fully expected that if it went the wrong way, we would have had the support of the community, across for people of color. And I really think that was the power. I knew that we would have it, and we didn't need to, that went the way we needed it to go. But I fully expected that this was going to be one of those, moments where we really banded together for something as people of color. And I think in that there is just such light, So anyway, that's what I'd like to share. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my insights.
Yeah, I can piggyback off of that, Stacy. I think similar to Stacy, my closing remarks would just be to, for just anybody like new to listening to, I don't know, like the struggles of the Latinx community or whatnot. Thank you for tuning in, but also just please take the time to further educate yourself and really understand what's going on in our community and why it's so important to vote and in both the local and general elections, because that's how we really make change. But also just to, as people of color, we really need to band together. Like, we are one, we are going through the same struggles. We have the same racial injustices. We have been oppressed for just years, and we're stronger together. We are, we're Hispanics are trending to be like the largest demographic in, you know, a few years. So I mean, we're here, we're powerful, and I think we just need to start showing up and using our voices, and just, I don't know, putting fear aside if that's in the way, because we are I mean, we come from a strong, fantastic, like brilliant people, and we just need to show up that way and unite and continue to make change, and keep doing things like this, right? Like showing up for our community, whether it be using our voice in a podcast or supporting a Black Lives Matter rally, but just like showing up by the numbers is really going to make a difference in the long run. And yeah, I also want to just thank everyone for being here and for allowing me to participate in this conversation. It's been fantastic.
Awesome. Alexis.
Yes. Yeah, I think that, as an Afro Taino person, I think it's really important that we start seeing that, our struggles aren't different. They're one and the same. Some of the same laws that have been affecting people, Black people specifically in this country, have been affecting us. And it's, as someone who's first generation Caribbean American, I grew up here perceived as a Black man, because I'm Black. And in this, as we as Latinx people understand our identities better, our stories are so deeply intertwined because of the slave trade. And the more we understand that, the anti-Blackness that is within the Latinx community right now is one of the reasons why, we've caused so much harm. We've contributed to that harm in some ways. And I think, like, I want to echo what Annette was saying in regards to, we can't, allyship is not enough anymore. You're either an accomplice, or you see yourself as part of the exact same struggle that they're in with them, with us, and understanding that when Black people win, we win too. There's no difference in how this game is being played on a socio-political, economic level, across this country. Um, if they come for you in the morning, they're coming for me in the evening. And these ICE raids are being extended to, some of the protests. Some of the people some of the same tactics that are being used by ICE are now being implemented on some of the protesters. And I think that there's something to see that, fascism in this country is rising. That same authoritarian regimes that a lot of Latinx people have been running from, in Central and South America is now present in the United States. And so, when we're coming here for safety, we have to make sure that we're talking about the safety of all people. And I'm really happy to be, with a group of like-minded people who are just as outspoken about, bringing those struggles together. So thank you all for inviting me. Thank you all for having us here. And bless.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think the takeaway for me too is action. So, not using your voice is and not taking action is not enough. So, you have to do that. That's our right. That's our expectation, and then we can help bring other people along and really start to make some systemic changes here to what's happening. But well, thank you guys. This was a really rich conversation, and I know I learned a lot, and I look forward to more of the insights that I know Stacy mentioned, and I appreciate the different perspectives on this that help us all unite and move forward in a more positive way.
Gracias,
So,
Thank
thank you.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. We want to thank our panelists, Jeff Baylor and Marco Hugo Lopez, and a special thanks to our moderator, Cristina Gonzalez, for this incredible discussion, and a big thank you to all our listeners. Special thanks to Latin Red of Ogilvy and Adelante of PepsiCo, who are the contributing Latinx ERGs and BRGs for this episode.